I want to continue with an assessment of today's meeting between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump. Joining me now to discuss this is former Pentagon official Dr. Michael Rubin, who is now Director of Policy Analysis at the Middle East Forum. He is also Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he specializes in Middle Eastern countries, particularly Iran and Turkey. Dr. Rubin, welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to see you back.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tony.
So as was just mentioned in his Truth Social post after the meeting, the president said, quote, there was nothing definitive reached other than I insisted that negotiations with Iran continue to see whether or not a deal, capital D, can be consummated, end quote. What do you make of that?
You know, this is typical Trump. He really does sincerely want to get a deal, but where the Iranians may get him wrong is that he's not willing, out of desperation, to be strung along. This is why we see reports of a second aircraft carrier heading to the region. And so the real mystery is what happened behind the scenes. And everything I hear is that behind the scenes, the two leaders, Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, are working in lockstep. And that extends to Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State.
There were I don't want to say rumors, there were sources suggesting that going into this meeting, that part of the meeting was for the Prime Minister to provide new intel to the President and to his team regarding the ballistic missile program and where that stands in terms of Iran recovering. What do we know about that aspect of the meeting?
Well, you know, the ballistic missile program is what determines the timing of any action. If we look back at the June 2025 12-day war, the reason why Israel launched its attack when it did was because the window of opportunity was closing, the window of opportunity that was opened when Israel earlier had destroyed Iran's anti-aircraft missile system. So what the Israelis are probably doing is looking at how much the Iranians have reconstituted to let Donald Trump know that the Iranians are probably going to try to drag you out past this point in time. And that's the point where there's got to be a red line and you've got to make a decision, or else we're going to act unilaterally.
For Iran to, if they're able to get it back online, their ballistic missile program, for them to use it, I think would almost be suicide. Because I think the United States would respond at that point. I think Israel would have a green light to respond. So is the concern that it might just be a standoff, or they would actually use it?
Well, there is a concern that Iran would use its ballistic missiles. Look, back in April 2024, Tony, Iran launched something like 300 missiles and drones at Israel, and a lot of people in Washington applauded that all but 7 of them had been shot down or intercepted. The fact of the matter is that if those 7 carried nuclear, biological, or chemical warheads, we'd be talking about a very different discussion about whether the interdiction was successful or not. But the danger with Iran isn't that they're suicidal, it's that they're terminally ill. And if the regime is collapsing, and make no mistake, the regime is teetering, what's to stop the most ideological component of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, those with nuclear, potentially missiles, or chemical weapons, from launching, knowing that there's going to be regime change in 24 hours afterwards? The analogy here is to something like Romania and the last days of Ceausescu.
So Dr. Rubin, are you suggesting that this time around, those ballistic missiles may be carrying a different type of payload?
Well, here's the problem I have with U.S. assessments that Iran still doesn't have a nuclear warhead. We can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Iran has already surpassed the enrichment levels of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. But you don't need necessarily a complete fission reaction and nuclear explosion to create devastation. If you launch nuclear material, 60%, 70% enriched uranium, in a warhead that scatters over Tel Aviv, the economic impact of that is going to be immense. So Iran already has the capacity of severe destruction, and that's what the United States and Israel are up against, and for that matter, the regional Arab states as well.
So the risk is too high to wait and see if, in fact, they have it.
That's absolutely the case. And this is another problem I traditionally have had with U.S. policy. And we saw this, for example, Tony, in the case of North Korea. For every failed nuclear or missile test, we pat ourselves on our back. We have a big sigh of relief that they're not there yet. But you can learn as much from a failed test as you can learn from a successful one. And so time is not on our side. The issue is whether or not we're going to be serious. I'd say over the last couple administrations, we weren't serious. We were kicking the can down the road, but eventually that road ends.
And as you and I were talking last time you were on the program just a couple of days ago, was that for Israel, there is no second chance.
No, that's absolutely the case. I mean, remember, Israel is the size of New Jersey, it's the size of Massachusetts, and at its narrowest point, it's only 8.2 miles wide. How long would it take to drive a tank across 8.2 miles? The fact of the matter is, Israel can't afford to have this. And you know, the former president, Hashemi Rafsanjani, once said, you know, let Israel attack us. It will only take one nuclear weapon in Israel to completely destroy the Jewish state. And even if they respond, we have the strategic depth. He said the quiet part out loud. We've got to start listening to what their Iranian leaders say.
Just about a minute and a half left, Dr. Rubin, but speaking about the breadth of Israel, where the president making a comment about not allowing Israel to exercise sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, that's not only an issue of national identity, but it's also a security issue as well.
Well, it absolutely is the case. You know, past peace processes, especially in 2008, we're talking about land swaps. But what makes Judea and Samaria unique, not just religiously, but in terms of international diplomacy, is technically they're not occupied territories. They're disputed territories because they have never belonged to a recognized sovereign state. And this is why everything should be open to negotiations. What the Palestinians have been claiming, and those who cheerlead for them from the sidelines, is that they want 100% before even the negotiations begin, and that's not the way the world works.
And we have found from the past that land for peace doesn't work very well.
No, that absolutely is the case. And again, it's not about land, it's not about development, it's fundamentally about the ideology of Hamas and the eliminationist genocidaire ideology that the Palestinians now embrace.
Dr. Rubin, always great to have you on the program. Thanks so much for your insights.
Thanks for having me, Tony.